this yesterday too in this room.
So we have a few spots up here for today. We will be working together really closely. So if you could fill in some of these seats up here, that would be great. We're going to be working in groups today. So if you if you can come from the back and kind of migrate and be with others, let's be family. Let's get in here. I know. No, I'll ask you.
I'm just kidding. We'll make it work.
We'll make it work. Okay. Well, before we get started, by a show of hands, are there any newer environmental directors that may have just started working in your position in the last maybe 3 years? Okay. What about 5 to 10 years, maybe longer? What about 10 plus? Got any folks? Okay, great. Yeah, we're gonna kind of mix it up later on, so it would be great. Like I said, if you can come on in, fill in some of these seats. Don't be shy. I won't bite. All right. Okay, hello, everyone. My name is Abigail Jones. Folks call me PJ. With me are a few of my GAP colleagues. Willard, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Willard Chin. I'm a GAP project officer, and I also support the team with ETEP and climate change.
Hi, I'm Abbey and I'll also be supporting their session. I'm also a GAP project officer, and I'll be helping with folks online today.
Hello, my name is J.R. Herbst. I'm a GAP project officer also. We'll be helping out Willard and PJ today.
All right. Let's get Jeanette. Yes.
Hello, I'm the corner person in this room. I'm also a GAP project officer and also happy to support this session. My name is Jeanette Sasek.
Awesome. Okay, so I am one of those people that will walk around the room. I'm not going to stay up front, so don't worry about following me around. But yeah, today we're going to be covering the bare bones of EPA Tribal Environmental Plans, or ETEPs. We're also going to do a workshop today where we're going to create the first component of an ETEP. So I do have a few pointers since we're doing a workshop today. I see some of you have laptops. If you also have a phone, we will need those later. So if you can pull them out, that'd be great. For folks online, yes, please have your phone and be ready to go to the next tab or open up a new tab in your laptop. There are some index cards on the tables today. So if you could, for the sake of time, we're just going to ask if you can write down any of the questions that you have during the presentation on those index cards. We have some also in the back on that black table. So if you can write down your questions, that'd be great. And for folks online, please feel free to ask questions in the chat and we'll answer them in real time. Okay, next slide, please. Let's go back one slide. There we go. All right, so let's start with the characteristics of ETEPs. ETEPs are comprehensive strategic planning documents that are finalized jointly with EPA and tribal grant recipients. They're all different in terms of content, length, and structure, and that's mostly because there's no requirement in terms of structure and also topic-specific content. So ETEPs are also living documents that can be reviewed by grantees on an annual basis, but ultimately, regional offices may ask folks to review and revise ETEPs at the end of the planning period, which is 3 to 5 years. We can go to the next slide. All right, so these are the three main components of ETEPs The first being the tribal environmental priorities, which includes the long-term development goals, capacity indicators, and sometimes technical assistance requests. The second component is EPA priorities, which includes EPA direct implementation responsibilities, with the last component being EPA regulated facilities. So we're going to touch upon all of these, but as I mentioned earlier, we're just going to create the first component together. Next slide, please. So through this component, a person can use ETEPs to streamline planning over a number of years and project funding needs to cover gap eligible work plan activities. So for this component, you're going to want to describe priority areas. An example of that would be climate change, or focusing on resiliency as it relates to climate-induced natural disasters like wildfires. Also, long-term development goals. An example of that would be assumption of a program authority, or TAS. Maybe also developing intergovernmental agreements. Also, some solid and hazardous waste implementation can be in there. Capacity indicators, which are aligned with both the priority areas and goals. And typically, target dates and fiscal years are associated with those capacity indicators. And something optional to include in that would be technical assistance requests. So something new for ETEPs would be for solid waste service delivery. So if you don't have an integrated waste management plan, you can add in these three service delivery components, which is the description of community service area, the description of the waste management program structure, and the description of the tribe's current and proposed waste management practices. So I do have an example on the table. Let's see, the person on the end, you have a big responsibility. You can pass this around. You don't have a You can pass it down so everyone can have an opportunity to see this example. So the big idea that I am showing you all is that the relationship between these elements, the priority areas, the long-term development goals, and capacity indicators will help tackle larger challenges associated with an identified priority area. So let's take a moment. You all can take pictures. I do have some links available so we can share them during the workshop and you can take a little bit more time to digest it. But essentially, first the person would identify the priority and then identify long-term development goals and then capacity indicators. And so that example is just depicting how the long-term development goals are going to tie to the capacity indicator and then guide work plan. So once the entire ETEP is finalized with all the other components, then yeah, you'll be able to guide your work plan if you choose to. Next slide. The fun stuff. Ooh, the fun stuff. Capacity indicators. So capacity indicators are milestones or short-term goals to address priorities with gap funding. And there's something new with ETEPs. It's required that capacity indicators are in the ETEP rather than in the work plan. So it's optional in work plans, but required in ETEPs. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the capacity indicator should also have an associated timeline and target date. And they typically tie to one or more work plan activities or commitments. And they are flexible, so that means that they can be added or removed throughout the lifetime of the grant or even beyond the lifetime of the grant. And though EPA may ask, folks to associate a target date, EPA doesn't set a time frame to complete the capacity indicator. And if a person feels that there are any capacity indicators that quite capture the work that will be done using gap funds, that person could submit a form to have a tribally developed capacity indicator. And that will only be done if you're trying to cover the work with GAP funds. Okay, next slide, please. So we're gonna talk about the last two components of an ETEP. So typically in the third quarter of the fiscal year, the EPA Region 9 GAP office will coordinate with other media programs. And for each tribe that's revising an ETEP, they'll coordinate to draft this summary of federally regulated entities and program priorities, which include those direct implementation responsibilities. And so a really great example of that would be, let's say there's a tribe that has 2 underground storage tanks that are inspected by EPA. So EPA is going to provide some information about that facility, maybe provide the facility ID, maybe even also provide the federal statute and how that program pursues the federal statute. And so on the slide, on the slide, you'll see the definition of direct implementation, and it's EPA's responsibility to manage federal environmental programs until tribal governments assume full responsibility for those delegable programs. So once a grantee receives this summary, a person could inquire about the facilities that are listed on there, maybe even ask when the last inspection occurred, or ask about how folks can get credentialing. Or maybe, you receive the draft summary and it looks good, but you're kind of worried about this motor shop that's down the street. You're like, they kind of accumulate a lot of hazardous waste or maybe used motor oil, and you'd just like to include it into this summary. You're more than welcome to do that. That's optional as well. Next slide, please. Okay. I want to give folks time to call out and share their ideas. Oh, you volunteers. Yay. We love it. Okay. If you could just read, some of the.
Well, this is weird. All right. Do you want me to start with reading the? Okay. Yeah. So our description of environmental challenge was a potential exposure to toxic cleaning products in daycares and youth centers. So there was no reports of any health concerns, and the council is interested in hearing how a plan could be implemented. So we started off with using capacity indicator PPA 0101, which is the Pollution Prevention Act. So the first one is a copy of assessments for individual businesses. So we were like, let's start there. And then a long-term, so one of the work plan activities we did was do an assessment for each of the different daycares and youth centers. A long-term goal for that would be, if you go onto EPA's website, there's a safer choice, and it helps with products of safer, helps with cleaning products for safer human health and environment. So we're we can start there, try to reduce those toxic hazardous waste, chemicals, and go for a safer choice. And next, we were after doing those assessments, we could adopt a pollution prevention program. So that was capacity indicator PPA 0102. We would do for our work plan activity is apply for the pollution prevention grant. So this would obviously be under GRAP indicators, then going for that grant. And then a long-term development goal for that was a copy of documented program for pollution prevention program. Yeah.
Give it up. Thank you. Any volunteers?
Hi there. Melissa Spandry, Environmental Director. For ours, we had the same where it was not reporting of health incidents, but talking about daycares and youth centers and better practices to use as far as products. So for our long-term development goal, we said outreach on better products or as well as household hazardous waste. As far as capacity indicators go, we said the XCUT 01.06, which is recipient establishing a community outreach process, planning with, and hopefully within the first year. And then as far as work plan activities, holding Zoom presentations, community council meetings, educating teachers and parents on swapping to more green and healthier products. For our second long-term development goal for this issue, we said to develop an SOP as well as a training plan and maybe have someone professionally credentialed to do so. And then for that capacity indicator, we said the XCUT 01.03, which is recipient is compiling written inventory of financial procedures, policies, regulations. Specifically, we emphasized on guidelines within that to develop and implement within that program, and then also within the first year. And then for work plan activities, we said to conduct policy/guidelines for what's allowed in the daycare and youth center, as well as take inventory of the products that are used.
Give them a round of
Thank you.
applause. Amazing. Any volunteers from air, climate change? Air. Yes, in the back.
Hi, I'm Ashley with Norfolk Rancheria, and we had air quality management program. So our long-term development goal was to achieve clean air. And then we use, for our capacity indicator, we use cross-cutting code 01.06. Recipient is establishing a community outreach process and policy and procedures are a plan. And we also, California Clean Air Act 0101 emissions inventory. And for our work plan activities, we focused on data research, air quality regulations, trainings, and local air monitoring equipment. Also planned MOUs with the Clean Air Act. So our long-term development goal is to develop air quality program. And some of our capacity indicators was CAA 0103 monitoring plan. And then some work plan activities was training and consultations. Thank you.
Anybody from waste or climate change? Climate change was a doozy. Yes.
So ours was on climate change. Quick description: tribe has experienced more severe and frequent droughts, wildfires, and periods of extreme heat. Wildfires have damaged tribal homes and resulted in loss of electricity on the reservation. Fires are also happening nearby off reservation, creating air pollution problems for tribal residents. The council has asked the two-person environmental office to coordinate with the tribal admin and housing and other tribal departments to address climate change. The tribe is in a rural location, and the closest nearby town is over 2 hours away. So long-term development goal is educating the community on the importance of defensible space, fuel breaks, wildfire safety, and the effects of climate change, as well as air quality. Capacity indicators are educational outreach on fire safety, having community meetings, providing informational flyers / social media posts, newsletters, mailed or door-to-door. Work plan activities is complete door-to-door delivery of informational documents like flyers, newsletters, mail outs, meeting announcements, and outreach events. And we put 1 per quarter. Secondary long-term development goal is to develop an emergency management plan. Capacity indicators is hold community meetings with community members as well as stakeholders like fire, police, EMS, other, to prioritize the safety needs. Work plan activities is hold meeting with tribal community and stakeholders, 1 meeting per quarter to discuss the needs. First draft of plan will be submitted by November 15th. Secondary will be the final draft for approval 12-2. That's what we got.
Okay, we have about 5 more minutes. Anyone from waste want to go? I do want to highlight climate change. It is a multimedia, issue, and I did mention this to some of the groups about some of the cross-cutting indicators, and something that Matt, I don't know if you said your name, but Matt brought up. A lot of the community outreach, that's XCUT 01.06, and it says recipient is establishing a community outreach process, procedures and/or plan. So there are a lot of different things. Also in that XCUT cross-cutting indicator category is creating a climate change preparedness or adaptation plan. So there are a lot of different things that you can do under climate change. Willard is the person to talk to about ETEPs and climate change, that intersection of the two. So if you have some questions, reach out to Willard. Okay, any questions? We do have a few minutes. Any questions about, the content, ETEPs? Yes?
So we had an air-related problem, and we came up with a long-term development goal of developing air quality management program. So then we found 2 capacity indicators. The first one was recipient is establishing an air quality monitoring program. Then the following one on the list is recipient is establishing an air monitoring strategy. And so I was just confused. Are the capacity indicators, are they in order of, because I would think you would develop a strategy first and then the program. So it seems like that maybe they're not in the order you would do them. They're just assembled under those topics. And also, I don't know. Yeah, just a little bit confusing on where to start, which one to start with, the strategy or the program.
We meet you where you're at. We really want you to think first about the priorities, what makes sense to you, and then we'll match the indicators and stuff like that. And keep in mind that this is a planning document that based on feedback from your tribal leadership, your members, and the research that you've done that you think it's the most important thing. And then eventually that will translate into the work plan. But in terms of the sequence and order, we'll work with you to put something in the ETEP that makes sense to you. So, the indicators are basically copy and paste from it's a metric that is a national tracking platform that we have to use that over a period of time, the 500 GAP programs across the country will report on each of these indicators. So we will know, 400 tribes, how they're doing in solid waste, So it's somewhat archaic, but it's important. But the key is, you need to be happy with the language of the indicators, and that will eventually translate to a work plan activity that you're happy with. So please talk to your GAP project officer. We have maximum flexibility. We want you to be happy with the format and the sequence of events.
All right, we will be available tomorrow from 12 to 12:45 at the Ballroom Terrace. That's right outside with the pretty lights. So if you want to talk more about ETEPs, we'll be out there, me and Willard. We don't have a shirt that says GAP or ETEPs or anything, but look at us, we'll be there. Take a picture of this slide. And then also, please feel free to reach out to us. There are so many resources that we can provide to make sense of ETEPs. Thank you.